I was sitting in the GP's waiting room in Brisbane when my phone buzzed in my handbag. The aircon was blowing a bit too cold, the vinyl chair squeaked every time someone shifted, and the whole place smelled like disinfectant and cheap floor polish. I tucked my Medicare card between my fingers and fished out the phone. It was my daughter, my only child, Sophie. For a moment, something warm flicked in my chest. She'd been busy again lately. Work, the kids, their flashy new place in Bulimba, her husband's growing business. There was always a reason she couldn't call properly. I answered gently. "Hi, love. Everything all right?" Her tone was odd. Flat, rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Mum, we're flying to Europe tomorrow, 6 months. Maybe longer. Big chance for Ethan's company." Had to move quickly. I blinked. "Europe? Tomorrow? That's a bit sudden, darling. What about the cafe? And the Noosa place? And, oh, that." She cut me off, calm as anything. "I've sorted it. We sold the Riverside Cafe lease, the Noosa shack, and the Corolla. We needed the funds to get into the investment. No time to muck around. I transferred a bit into your account to tide you over. Anyway, gotta go. Bye, Mum." And she hung up. Just like that. I stared at my phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for her to say she'd mucked it up. Some kind of joke, some misunderstanding. But nothing happened. The waiting room carried on around me, a man clearing his throat, a toddler dropping biscuits on the floor, the receptionist calling out names. Everything sounded far away. The cafe. The small riverside place in West End. My late husband and I had built from nothing. We'd sold the business years ago, but kept the lease and sublet it. That rent was what kept me steady. My little safety net, my piece of independence, the Noosa shack, a run-down fibro box, 10 minutes from the water, full of peeling paint and memories. Peter and I bought it when Sophie was 13. Christmas lunches, sandy feet, sausages on the cheap Bunnings barbecue. It all lived there. And my old silver Corolla. It wasn't much, but Peter loved that car. He'd wash it every Sunday, humming under his breath, saying it'd last longer than both of us. The driver's seat still smelled faintly of his aftershave and takeaway coffee. It was the last car he ever drove. 43 years of raising my girl. Double shifts at the Royal Brisbane. Late nights. Skipping new shoes so she could have proper school supplies. Sitting through every school assembly, no matter how tired I was. And she'd cleared out my life like she was offloading old furniture. A hot sting prickled behind my eyes. For a moment I thought the tears would come. The raw, shaking kind I'd cried the morning Peter didn't wake up over his Vegemite toast. But something altogether different settled in instead. I drew a long, steady breath. My shoulders dropped. A strange calm spread through me. The kind that arrives just before a summer storm breaks. Because suddenly I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. A plain brown folder. Hidden at the back of my wardrobe. 1 week before he died, Peter had come home from running around in the city with that folder tucked under his arm. He placed it on the kitchen table and said quietly, "Mags, pop this on the top shelf of the wardrobe, love. Don't open it yet. Only when you're actually ready, all right?" I'd teased him. "What is it? Your emergency stash of Tim Tams?" He'd given that soft, lopsided smile that always made my stomach warm. Something like that. After he passed, everything blurred. Funeral arrangements, Centrelink appointments, neighbours dropping off casseroles. I shoved the folder away and never looked at it again. Grief has a way of wiping whole months clean. "Margaret Lawson?" the nurse called. I jolted back to the room. "Yes, that's me." The GP said I was doing fine for my age. Blood pressure a touch high, cholesterol a bit cheeky, but nothing a few more walks and fewer iced coffees. Wouldn't help. I nodded. But my mind had already left that room. It was home, in my wardrobe, on the top shelf. On the bus back to Annerley, Brisbane rolled past the window. Tradies heading home, kids in uniforms glued to their phones, mums dragging prams, cafes packing up. Everyone wrapped up in their own dramas, and I realized I had mine too. One I'd ignored for years. When I reached my quiet little weatherboard house, I didn't put the kettle on or switch on the telly. I walked straight down the hall, past the family photos Sophie always joked were a bit daggy, and opened my bedroom wardrobe. I moved aside a neat row of cardigans. There it was, the brown folder, exactly where I'd left it. Peter's handwriting across the front. For Maggie. When you're ready. My hands were steady now. I sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for decades and opened the folder carefully, like it might breathe. Inside was an organized stack of documents, legal papers, titles, bank statements from accounts I didn't recognize. And on top of them all, a handwritten note in Peter's careful block letters. As I read the first few lines, my breath caught. Because sitting there in my small Brisbane bedroom, with the afternoon sun turning the jacarandas outside a deep violet, I understood something with absolute clarity. My daughter thought she'd strip me of everything. But Peter, my Peter, had never been the kind of man who left his wife unprotected. Not then, not ever. On top of the documents sat Peter's letter. Just a few pages of lined paper from one of those cheap Coles notepads he kept by the landline. The handwriting hit me straight away. Steady, clear. Not the shaky scrawl from his final months. He must have written it before things really went downhill. My Mags, if you're reading this, it means I've carked it and you finally decided you're ready. Like you always say, don't get cross with me for keeping this to myself. I know you. If I'd told you too early, you would have fussed, worried, and talked me out of half of it. While you were busy looking after everyone else, I was looking after you, properly. The cafe and the shack were never our only eggs in the basket. Love, Peter. My eyes pricked. That was him to the bone. Calm, practical, refusing to make a big fuss, even from beyond the grave. I turned the page. Remember when I started those extra hours with the freight mob? You thought I'd lost the plot. Getting up before dawn at my age. I told you it was just to keep busy after finishing full-time work. That wasn't the whole truth. I used that money, and every spare bit we tucked away, to buy a few things. Quietly. Sensible things. Nothing showy. No online schemes or crypto rubbish. Everything's in the Lawson family trust. You're the trustee and the main beneficiary. Sophie isn't on it. That's deliberate. I froze. A trust? In all those years, when I'd worried about paying electricity bills and keeping the cafe afloat, he had been, what? Building another life underneath ours? My hands felt a little unsteady as I lifted the first bundle. There it was, the Lawson family trust deed. Properly drafted, with a city law firm's name printed along the top. My name listed as trustee. My name again as primary beneficiary. Behind it sat more documents, title deeds, contracts, a thick manila sleeve marked bank, term deposits, shares. I took a breath and went back to the letter. We've got a small block of 4 units out at Wynnum, the whole building where the cafe sits, a storage yard in Rocklear, ugly as anything, but it rents well, and a solid bunch of shares in a logistics company and a healthcare mob on the ASX. None of this is for show. It's so you'll never have to think twice about rates, doctor's bills, or anything else that matters. You're all right, Mags. More than all right. I sifted through the titles slowly. The Wynnum units had tenants listed. Middle-aged couples, a pensioner, a young bloke starting out, Ordinary people who had no idea their landlord was currently sitting on her bed in an old Kmart nightie, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. Then I saw the one that made my heartbeat thud heavier. Lot 3, commercial premises, Riverside Strip, West End, the cafe. Not just the lease Sophie had offloaded, the whole building, the very place Peter and I had lost sleep over for years. A soft, dry laugh slipped out of me. Sophie had sold the scraps. The actual loaf was still in my hands. I kept reading. I didn't tell you because of Soph. You know what she's like. She's got a decent heart under all that insta-perfect nonsense, but she's never understood money. If she knew how well we'd done, she'd start seeing dollar signs instead of people. And I didn't want some bloke choosing her for your bank balance. If she's been good to you, look after her. You always do. If she hasn't, well, then you do whatever you need to. Love, you've got more power than you realize. I let the letter rest in my lap for a moment. More power than you realize. An hour earlier, I thought I was a pensioner whose daughter had stripped her of her last bit of security for some European opportunity. The kind of story neighbours whisper about at Woolies. Now, I wasn't just a widow with a few memories and a sagging weatherboard in Annerley. I was a trustee, a property owner, someone with options, real ones. I turned to the final section of the folder. Bank statements neatly filed, term deposits that had rolled over for years, dividends Peter had quietly reinvested. The figures at the bottom didn't scream wealth, but they were enough that I'd never need to count out coins for prescriptions again. I thought of Sophie's voice earlier, quick, sharp, almost bored. We needed the cash, Mum. Not we. They. She'd decided I was done. A bit slow, someone to tidy up before she caught her flight to a shinier life on the other side of the world. But Peter had seen something else. He'd looked at me, the same woman Sophie had written off, and thought, better make sure she has choices. I lifted the last page. A business card was clipped neatly in the corner. Daniel Rees and Partners, Commercial and Property Law, Brisbane, CBD. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of the fridge and a kookaburra, laughing its head off, somewhere down the street. My daughter believed she'd cleared me out. But Peter, steady, stubborn, thoughtful Peter, had made sure I still owned more than she knew. More, in fact, than she'd ever imagined. I barely slept. Every time I shut my eyes, Peter's handwriting floated back, calm, steady, telling me I held the keys. Those words didn't let go of me all night. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I showered, did my hair properly for once, and put on my nicest blouse, the navy one with tiny white dots that always made me feel a bit fresher. My black slacks still fit, as long as I didn't breathe too deeply. Then I took the 196 bus into the city, clutching Peter's folder like it was a life jacket. Brisbane at 9 o'clock was bustling as usual. Tradies grabbing takeaway coffees, office workers rushing across crossings, tourists wandering Queen Street Mall looking hopeful and lost at the same time. The whole city sparkled in the morning light. I didn't feel sparkly. I felt like a woman pretending she knew what she was doing. Rees and Partners was tucked inside a tall building near Eagle Street Pier. The foyer was polished and echoey, the sort of place where people's shoes click too loudly. I pressed the lift button for level 18 and held the folder close to my chest. If Sophie had known where I was headed, she'd have had plenty to say. The receptionist looked about 16. Perfect brows, shiny nails, a bright smile. Morning. Do you have an appointment? Yes, love. With Daniel Rees. She checked her screen. Mrs. Lawson? He'll be right with you. Please take a seat. I sat on a leather chair that felt far too soft for someone like me. A moment later, a tall man in his late 50s stepped out of a glass door. Maggie Lawson? He asked. That's me. I'm Daniel. Come through. His office was neat without being showy. Shelves of well-thumbed books, a photo of two grown kids at the beach, and a view of the river that almost made my chest tighten. It was peaceful, the sort of room where people told the truth because they couldn't pretend. So, he said gently, I'm guessing you've opened Peter's folder. I have, and I still don't quite understand it. That's normal. Peter planned this over many years. He wanted things set up properly, but quietly. Quietly, meaning away from Sophie. I placed the folder on his desk. I need you to explain everything. Slowly. Don't assume I know a thing. Of course, he said. That's my job. He began with the trust. Peter had started it more than a decade ago, using money from freight shifts, careful savings, and what Daniel called solid, sensible investments. You're the sole trustee, he said, which means it's all under your control. If you sold the whole lot tomorrow, no one could stop you. I'm not selling anything, I replied. Not until I understand exactly what's what. That's a good approach, he nodded. He talked me through the properties one by one, placing each document in front of me with quiet patience. The Wynnum units, fully rented, no mortgage. Rocklea, the storage yard, ugly but reliable. And the big one, the cafe building on the river. Sophie only sold the lease, Daniel explained kindly. Not the building. Think of it like renting out a corner of a shop. You still own the shop itself. I let out a slow breath. The cafe wasn't gone. Not the real part of it. Then came the bank accounts, term deposits, dividends, trust accounts. More numbers than I'd seen in years. Enough to knock the wind out of me for a moment. All those evenings I'd counted coins in the kitchen drawer, worried about the next electricity bill, and Peter had been building something steady under my feet. Daniel, I said, this all needs to stay quiet. I assumed as much, he said softly. Is it your daughter? My throat tightened. She took advantage of me, sold things that weren't hers, treated me like I was... past it. Daniel didn't flinch. He'd clearly seen families fall apart over far less. What would you like to do, Maggie? What a question. What did I want? I thought of Sophie's voice on the phone, brisk, distracted, as if she were sorting out an old cupboard instead of a person. We needed the cash, Mum. Then I thought of Peter, his neat handwriting, his steady faith in me. If she was good to you, look after her. If she wasn't, do what you need to do. I met Daniel's eyes. I want everything properly in my name, I said. Titles, accounts, all of it. Whatever wasn't set up cleanly, I want it fixed. And anything Sophie sold without the right to sell, I want it back. Daniel nodded once, firm. That can all be arranged. Anything else? I swallowed, feeling something settle inside me. Calm, not anger. Yes. When the time comes, I want her to see me clearly, not the version she decided I was. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly, but not in disapproval. Very well, Mrs. Lawson, he said. Let's begin. The week that followed felt strange, like living two versions of my life at once. In the mornings, I slipped back into the version of Maggie everyone in the neighborhood recognized. I watered the front garden in my thongs, waved to the postie, chatted with the checkout lady at Woolies about the heat. People spoke to me gently, with that soft, cautious tone they save for widows and pensioners. Oh, love, must be hard without Sophie around. You managing all right without the car? If you ever need a lift to the chemist, just holler. I'd smile, thank them, make polite noises. They saw someone fragile. Inside, I knew better. Hidden in my handbag was a notebook labeled M.L. Trust, confidential. And each day, it felt less like a joke and more like a second spine growing inside me. Because in the afternoons, my real education began. Daniel talked me through everything, slow, steady, no jargon he didn't explain. And with each meeting, something in me sharpened. Not anger exactly, just clarity. "This will transfer full control of the titles to you," he said one afternoon. "These are the tenancy agreements. And this is your projected trust income for the next 5 years." Projected income? Me, Maggie Lawson from Annalee, reading projected income like I was some seasoned property investor from Toorak. I wrote everything down in my little Officeworks notebook. I color-coded things. I drew arrows. It was the most organized I'd been in years, and oddly the most alive I'd felt too. And through it all, Peter stayed with me. Not in some dramatic, ghostly way, just in the steady memory of how he'd believed I could do this long before I believed it myself. But underneath the learning and the paperwork sat something heavier. Sophie still hadn't called. Not a text, not a missed call, not even a "hope you're well, Mum." While Daniel and I were untangling the mess she'd left behind, she was off somewhere in Europe having croissants and taking photos of cathedrals. Or so I'd assumed. Then Thursday came. I was dragging the bins out when Lorraine from across the street marched over, puffing slightly, like she'd hurried. "Maggie, you're not going to believe this." "What now?" She leaned in, lowering her voice, although not a soul was outside. "I saw something Sophie posted last night. She took it down quick, but half the suburb screenshotted it." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "She was crying in some hotel bathroom. Said Ethan's business deal was a scam. The money's gone, and she can't get hold of him." I stood there holding the bin lid, letting the words settle. "She didn't message me," I said. Lorraine hesitated. "Maybe she's embarrassed, love." Embarrassed. Yes, that was one word. Another was frightened. But I didn't reach for my phone. She'd left me sitting in a GP waiting room, while she gutted my life through a rushed phone call. She could sit in her hotel bathroom a bit longer. That afternoon, Daniel rang. "Maggie, we've regained control of the cafe lease. You'll have the paperwork in hand next week." I exhaled, a slow, steady breath that felt like it had been stuck in my chest for months. "And the shack?" I asked. "Nearly sorted. I expect it back under the trust within a fortnight. Piece by piece. Everything Sophie had tried to pull apart was falling quietly back into place." When I hung up, I made myself a cuppa, sat at the kitchen table and slid Peter's folder toward me. The soft rustle of paper felt oddly comforting. His handwriting, his planning, his stubborn, gentle belief in me. I rested my hand on the letter he'd written. "You always saw something in me I forgot was there," I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, the feeling that settled inside me wasn't fear or anger. It was purpose, calm, steady, grounded. Sophie thought she'd left me with nothing, but I was only just finding my footing. It was one of those sticky Brisbane afternoons, where the air felt thick enough to chew when my phone finally lit up with a message from Sophie. Not a call, not even a voice note. Just a short text. "Mum, can we talk? It's urgent." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. Part of me wanted to ring straight away. Another part, the part that remembered sitting alone in that GP waiting room while she dismantled my life in under 2 minutes, kept me still. After a moment I typed, "I'm home. You can call." The little typing dots flickered on, then off, then again, then nothing. 10 minutes passed. The kettle boiled, still nothing. Typical Sophie. Start something, walk away from it before it lands. The next morning, it wasn't Sophie who reached out first. Daniel rang. "Maggie," he said. Tone calm but edged with something. "The Noosa sale is officially being reversed. The buyers are relieved. Apparently, your daughter told them you were in palliative care." I closed my eyes and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose. Why on earth would she say that? To justify the price, most likely, he said gently. There wasn't a sharp pain, no dramatic heartbreak, just a cold, steady acknowledgement. Sophie hadn't panicked. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd lied, clean, deliberate, and without hesitation, if it meant getting money quickly. Maggie, are you all right? Daniel asked softly. Yes, I said. I just needed to hear it plainly. That night I sat on the front step with a cup of chamomile, listening to the cicadas chatter across the street. The heat clung to my skin, the kind that wouldn't shift until a storm pushed through. Still no call from Sophie, but the phone did ring. Lorraine again. Mags, love, you won't believe this one, she said, waddling past the hibiscus hedge like she owned the street. My cousin's mate works for that budget airline, you know, the red one, and she said Sophie and Ethan had a blow-up right in the middle of Barcelona airport. I took a slow sip. A blow-up? About money, apparently. Turns out Ethan bought into some dodgy online thing, crypto or whatever, and lost the lot. Then he tried to convince Sophie to fly to Prague alone while he sorted it. You can imagine how well that went. I could. I'd seen Ethan's charm crack before, revealing a man who chased big wins, but never the truth. And here's the kicker, Lorraine added, lowering her voice even though no one was around. Word is, he's done a runner. Took whatever was left and vanished. I thanked her and headed inside. I didn't rush to call Sophie. I didn't rush anywhere. The call came the next morning anyway. A shaky breath. Then, Mum? Her voice was small. No polish, no confidence. Nothing like the girl who'd told me she'd sold my life out from under me. Sophie, I said, steady. Mum, I don't know what to do. There it was, the crack in the surface. What's happened, love? It's Ethan. He's gone, just gone. He said he'd meet me back at the hotel, but his card stopped working, and his phone's off, and the hotel said he left without paying. I breathed in slowly, not sympathy, steadying myself. I'm sorry, darling. That must be awful. Mum, he took our money. All of it. The investment. The savings. I didn't correct her, that the savings she mentioned weren't hers. And it gets worse, she whispered. There's a loan in my name, a big one. I didn't sign anything, I swear I didn't. The pieces came together, clean, simple and ugly, forged signatures, fake investments, loans taken without permission, running overseas to outrun the fallout. Ethan wasn't new. He was the type Peter had feared from the beginning. Where are you now? I asked quietly. At the airport. I'm flying home tonight. Good, I said. Come home. A pause. Then, in a voice that sounded younger than I'd heard in years, Mum, can I stay with you for a bit? Just until I sort myself out? I waited a second. Not cruelly, just long enough for honesty to sit between us. Yes, Sophie, you can stay. Because this wasn't an ending. This was the start of something she needed to face. She hadn't felt the bottom yet, but she would. And I'd be there, not to cushion the fall, but to make sure she finally understood the ground she'd trampled on. Sometimes the hardest lessons come when the world stops protecting you. And my daughter was about to learn hers. Sophie arrived just after 9. I saw the Uber pull up from the kitchen window, its headlights washing over the front fence, before fading into the humid Brisbane evening. She stepped out slowly, pulling one suitcase behind her, the only one she had left by the looks of it. Her posture told the story before she even reached the gate. Shoulders down, hair scraped back into a knot that had given up hours earlier, clothes creased and hanging off her like she'd slept in them. She looked worn out in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl coming home from school camp. She stood at the gate for a long moment, taking in the house. Her first home, her safe place, the one thing she thought she'd outgrown. When she finally walked up the path, I opened the door. "Mum." Her voice cracked around the word. "Come in, love." The moment she crossed the threshold, her suitcase slipped from her hand. Then she stepped forward and hugged me, really hugged me. Not a quick squeeze or a distracted greeting. Just held on, as if she'd run out of strength somewhere over the Indian Ocean. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I didn't say, "It's all right," because it wasn't. But I did put a hand on her back and say, "You're home, sit down, and we'll sort you out." In the kitchen, Sophie paused, her eyes drifting around the room. Peter's old footy magnets on the fridge, the chipped tile near the sink, the faded photo of our Noosa trip when she was 8. She looked at it all, like it belonged to a life she'd forgotten. "Sit," I said gently. "I'll put the kettle on." She sniffed, rubbing her sleeve across her face. "Tea isn't going to fix this, Mum." "No," I said, "but it'll settle you a bit." When I set the mug in front of her, she wrapped her hands around it like she needed something steady to hold on to. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then everything came out in one long rush. "Mum, I didn't know what Ethan was doing, I swear I didn't. He told me it was an opportunity, something that would set us up. He said we needed quick cash. I thought selling your things was temporary, just until the money came in." I stayed quiet, letting her talk. "I thought you'd say no," she added, voice breaking. "That's usually the time to ask," I said quietly. She closed her eyes. "Ethan said you didn't need the shack or the cafe lease, that you were being sentimental." A familiar pinch tightened in my chest. Not pain, just a truth landing in its place. "And the loans?" I asked. "The signatures?" Her face crumpled. "Mum, I had no idea. I found out when the bank emailed me in Barcelona. There's a loan in my name, over 100 grand. I never signed anything. And the landlord said the bond for the flat was under my ID. I never saw a single form." I reached over and put my hand on hers. It trembled so much I could feel it in my fingertips. "What are you going to do, love?" I asked. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. I've got nothing. No place to stay, no car, no job. And the bank won't stop calling." For the first time in her adult life, Sophie didn't try to cover the fear. She let it show. "Mum," she whispered, "can I stay here for a while? Just until I figure things out?" I didn't rush the answer. I let the weight of it sit in the room. "Yes," I said at last. "You can stay." Her shoulders sagged with relief. Tears spilled, quick and messy. "Thank you, Mum. I'll look for work straight away. I'll pay rent, You don't need to race ahead," I said gently. "Just breathe. We'll sort things step by step." She nodded, wiping her eyes. But inside me, something settled. Quiet, steady, certain. Sophie had come home, yes. But this wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of the part that mattered. Not punishment, not revenge, just the truth. Real life. Responsibility. Peter used to say some lessons only land when the world stops cushioning you. And he was right. My daughter wasn't floating above the mess anymore. She was standing on solid ground, finally. And I intended to help her stay there long enough to find her way back to herself. Sophie moved back into her old room the next morning. I stood by the doorway as she set her suitcase on the bed. Years ago, that headboard was covered in unicorn stickers and glittery tape. Now, a grown woman stood there, folding shirts that looked like they'd lived in airports and backpacker laundries. She opened the drawers slowly. Neat piles at first. Then her hands shook, and she had to stop, breathing carefully. "Do you need anything?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just some space, Mum. I need to get my head straight." "All right," I said, and left her to it. Some things people have to sort through on their own. For the next 2 days, Sophie drifted around the house as if she wasn't sure she belonged in it. She barely spoke, barely ate. At night I heard her crying, quiet, broken sounds she tried to hide in her pillow. I didn't go in. Not yet. This was the part she had to walk through herself, the bit Peter meant when he talked about learning the hard way. On the third morning, she wandered into the kitchen wearing one of Peter's old t-shirts she'd pinched years ago. It hung off her now, like it wasn't sure what body it was meant for. She sat down carefully, like every movement took effort. "Mum, I think I need to get a job." I nodded. "What kind of work?" "I don't know. Anything. I'm not fussy anymore." That was new. This was the same girl who once rejected an admin job because the office lighting felt depressing. "What about hospitality?" I suggested. "You were good in the cafe when you were younger." She winced. "Mum, I can't get hired anywhere decent. My credit report is trashed. I applied for a couple of things yesterday. No one's calling back." She was right. With Ethan's forged debts hanging over her name, any employer who checked records would think twice. "Still worth trying," I said. "Go in person, look people in the eye. Makes a difference." She drew in a long breath. "Okay, I'll try." She came home late that afternoon, sweaty and discouraged. "I walked up and down Logan Road for hours," she said, dropping her handbag on the floor. "Half the places weren't hiring. The ones that were, they took one look at my form and said they'd be in touch. Any bites at all?" "One job," she said bitterly, "cleaning offices in the city. Night shift, minimum wage." She gave a wry little laugh. "I used to complain about brunch shifts. Now I'm scrubbing bins." "Cleaning is honest work," I said calmly. "A lot of people make a living that way." Her eyes flicked up, and the sharp edges in them were gone, replaced by something quieter. "Mum, I don't know how to live like this. I've never had to." "It's not poverty you're feeling," I said softly. "It's responsibility. Everyone meets it sooner or later." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I start tomorrow." Her first shift changed her. She came through the front door at 1:45 in the morning, shoes muddy from the alley, behind the office building, hair stuck to her face with sweat. She dropped into a chair, drained. "How'd it go?" I asked. "It was rough," she admitted. "My arms are killing me. I met a woman named Margaret. She's 62 and looks after her grandkids. She said this is one of the better jobs." Sophie let out a shaky breath. "I had no idea, Mum. No idea how hard people work just to keep their heads above water. I've been so wrapped up in myself." I reached out and rested my hand over hers. "You're learning," I said. "That's all that matters." She looked back at me, eyes soft, for the first time since she'd come home. "Thank you for letting me stay." "You're my daughter," I said simply. "There's always a bed for you here. But you need to grow into someone who respects what that means." She nodded, crying without trying to hide it. "I will. I promise I will." Over the next week, the changes came quietly. She cleaned her room without being asked. She bought groceries with her own pay. She hung washing on the line. She apologized. Not dramatically, just quietly, to the neighbors she'd once brushed past. Her pride thinned out, layer by layer. But something steadier replaced it, an honesty in how she moved through each day. And as I watched her, I felt a slow, warm certainty settle inside me. She was edging closer to the woman Peter always hoped she'd become. But this part of the journey wasn't just hers, because soon she'd learn something she hadn't even imagined. While she was picking up the pieces she could see, I was fixing the ones she couldn't. Deliberately, quietly. and with far more reach than she realized. While Sophie was learning how to scrub boardroom tables and empty bins in the same skyscrapers she used to photograph from cafe patios, I was doing my own kind of work, quiet, steady, and a fair bit more complicated than she realized. Most afternoons, once she'd gone for a nap before her night shift, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my reading glasses, low on my nose, and spread out the stack of documents Daniel kept emailing through. Contracts, reversal notices, fraud reports, bank confirmations, letters written in that polished solicitor tone that always made me mutter, "Just say it straight, love." Still, I read every page. Peter had trusted me to handle this. The least I could do was prove him right. The first real win, it came on a Wednesday morning. I was slicing fruit when the phone rang. "Maggie, I've got excellent news," Daniel said. "Go on," I replied, wiping my hands on a tea towel. "The cafe lease reversal is final. The buyers agreed without a fuss once we showed them the inconsistencies. They weren't acting in bad faith. They were misled." My jaw tightened. There's only one person who could have misled them. Daniel paused. "Let's just say there was misinformation. And the building itself. You've retained full ownership, as always. The lease returns to your control next week." The word he used next felt like a warm blanket. Secure. "And the Noosa place?" I pressed. "We're almost there. The buyers are cooperating." I let out a slow breath. Another piece of my life returning to where it belonged. Sophie's quiet shift. Meanwhile, Sophie was changing in ways she didn't yet recognize. She'd come home in the early hours, tired, sweaty, but calmer than before. Over toast, she'd tell me about the women she worked with. Mrs. Patel, saving to put her son through uni. Rhonda, rebuilding her life after leaving a violent partner. And Margaret, 62 with 3 grandkids, cracking jokes through swollen knees. "They're incredible, Mum," she said one morning, buttering her toast slowly. "They work so hard. And they don't complain. I've lived in some bubble my whole life." "You're seeing what most people grow up seeing," I said gently. Her eyes dropped. "I should have listened more. To you, to Dad." I didn't answer that one. Some truths land better when you let them sit. The call that changed everything. Later that afternoon, Daniel rang again. "Maggie, this next bit is important. Are you sitting down?" "I'm 70, I said dryly. "I sit whenever I can." He chuckled, then continued. "One of the banks confirmed the signatures on several loan documents weren't Sophie's. Ethan submitted everything. He used copies of her ID, altered forms, even set up a fake email in her name." A cold, steady anger moved through me. "That man used her," I said quietly. "Yes. And because of that, we can build a strong identity fraud case. It'll take time, weeks, maybe a month, but we can clear her of the debts." I closed my eyes. Sophie thought she'd ruined her life for good. She didn't know I'd already started rebuilding the ground beneath her feet. "Do whatever needs doing," I said. "It's already underway." Good on you, Daniel. The evening truth. That night, Sophie came into the kitchen, hair damp from her shower, eyes tired but clearer than before. "Mum, thanks for letting me stay. I know I didn't deserve it." "Maybe not before," I said honestly. "But you're earning your place now." Her eyes widened. Not hurt, just surprised to hear the truth said gently. "I want to fix things," she whispered. "With you, with everything." "That's a solid start." She nodded, swallowing back emotion. The part she didn't see, but there was something she didn't know. Not yet. She didn't know I'd been untangling every mess Ethan left behind. She didn't know how many calls I'd made. how many signatures I'd checked, how many early mornings I'd spent going over files with Daniel. She didn't know how carefully I was setting things right for her. Not because I wanted her to owe me, not because I wanted her to feel small, but because rebuilding her life properly required two things: her learning from the ground up, and me clearing the wreckage she couldn't see. Peter used to say, "If the gentle lessons don't land, life will sort it out." Life had done its part. Now it was my turn to guide her the rest of the way, quietly, steadily, and with far more patience than she knew she needed. By the middle of the second week, Sophie's life had shrunk to a tight little loop. Sleep until midday, toast and instant coffee at the kitchen table, apologize for things she hadn't even done. Head off in her high-vis vest to clean offices she used to walk past in heels. Come home in the early hours, bone-tired, and do it all again. From the outside, it probably looked pathetic. From where I sat watching quietly, I could see something else. She was finally being stripped back to who she really was. She'd stopped talking about manifesting opportunities and leveraging connections. She listened, properly, without rolling her eyes or checking her phone. Her sentences were slower, her tone softer, her eyes older. One Thursday, she sat at the table with her pay slip printed out, fingers smoothing the paper again and again. $624, she murmured, almost to herself. "That's a solid week's work," I said, stirring my tea. She gave a hollow little laugh. "Mum, that's less than what I've spent on a handbag." "Just one handbag." I raised an eyebrow. "And did any of those handbags scrub a single office bin?" She winced, then shook her head. "No, they just sat on shelves while I pretended I wasn't bored and miserable." She stared at the numbers again, really seeing them this time. "There are women at work sending money back home to Fiji and India on less than this," she said quietly. "They're grateful for every shift. And I've been..." "What? Complaining about my hair appointments and European summers?" "A lot of people have been living in the real world while you've been floating above it," I said gently. "You've just landed, that's all." She swallowed, cheeks flushing with shame. "I don't want to be that person anymore, Mum. I don't want to be shallow." "That's a good start," I replied. "The trick is what you do from here." She folded the pay slip with care, as if it were something precious instead of just a bit of paper with numbers on it. Later that day, while she slept before her shift, I caught the bus into West End to meet Daniel at the cafe building. Not the cozy little shopfront people saw from the street, the whole building. The one my daughter had tried to gut from under me without realizing it was mine, right down to the foundations. The afternoon heat rose off the footpath in waves as we unlocked the side entrance. Inside, the cafe was quiet, between the morning rush and the after-work crowd. Chairs were stacked, the smell of old coffee and toasted banana bread hanging in the air. "This place has good bones," Daniel said, glancing around as we walked through to the back. "You could do a lot with it." "I did once," I replied, "for 20 years. We stepped into the rear storeroom, boxes stacked neatly against the wall, the hum of the drinks fridge filling the silence. "Today," he said, pulling a folder from his bag, "we're signing everything needed to lock this building. And the rest of the trust, firmly under your control. Titles, deeds, corrected lease paperwork. Once it's all processed, Sophie won't be able to touch any of it. Not legally. Not even with a smooth-talking husband in her ear." "Good," I said. "This isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries." "That's exactly what it is," he agreed. He laid the documents out on an old stainless steel bench. "Sign here, and initial that page." I took my time, reading each section, not pretending to understand, actually understanding. Most people your age don't insist on reading every clause, Daniel said with a small smile. They just ask where to sign. Most people my age haven't had their life sold off over a phone call, I replied. He chuckled softly, then sobered. Maggie, you know this, but I'll say it anyway. You're in a very strong position. Financially, legally. Sophie has no idea. Good, I said again. She's got enough to deal with. On the way home, the bus rattled over the bridge as the river glinted below. I sat with Peter's folder on my lap, my reflection faint in the window, a woman with more lines on her face than she remembered, but eyes that had finally stopped looking lost. When I stepped through my front door, I found Sophie sitting on the couch, clutching her phone tight enough to crack it. The bank rang again, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I put my bag down and sat beside her. What did they say? They said the loan is officially in arrears, that if I don't start repayments, they'll escalate it. Legal department, court, all of it. Her breath hitched. Mum, I told them, again, that I didn't sign those forms. They didn't care. They just said, "It's in your name, Ms. Lawson." Terror sat in her eyes like a storm. I can't pay it, she whispered. I can't even pay the interest. I'm getting $600 a week, Mum. I can barely pay for petrol and groceries. I don't know what to do. I took her hand, warm and shaking. Sometimes, I said calmly, things look their worst right before they start turning. She stared at me, confused and desperate. What does that mean? It means, I squeezed her hand. Some messes are bigger than a phone call can fix. But that doesn't mean they can't be fixed. By who? She breathed. I've stuffed it, Mum, completely. You've been stuffed, I thought, by a man who saw you as collateral. Out loud, I only said, trust me a little longer. Don't ignore the calls, but don't agree to anything without talking to me first. Or to a solicitor. A solicitor? She echoed. I can't afford one. I smiled faintly. You might be surprised what you can afford. She didn't know that Daniel was already knee-deep in paperwork proving she'd been stitched up by Ethan. She didn't know that behind the scenes her fraudulent debts were starting to wobble. That night, after she left for work, I made myself a cuppa and sat at the kitchen table with Peter's folder open. Outside, the jacarandas along our street were starting to drop their blossoms, purple petals sticking to the warm bitumen. The ceiling fan clicked gently as it turned, stirring the air the way Peter used to poke at a fire with the poker, never in a rush, always patient. You were right about her, you know, I said quietly to the empty room. About all of it. Sophie had been dazzled by a man who spoke in big promises and complicated schemes. She'd ignored the quiet, boring safety of hard work and steady planning. She'd gambled with what she thought was mine and almost lost everything that was actually hers. Almost. Around 2 a.m, the front door clicked open. Sophie came in, shoulders sagging, hair frizzy from the humid night. She dropped her bag on the chair and leaned against the kitchen bench, eyes red, but a little clearer than the week before. How was it? I asked. Fine, she said, then corrected herself. Hard, but honest. She slipped into the chair opposite me. Mum, can I ask you something? Go on. How did you not fall apart when Dad died? I feel like everything's breaking and I'm not built for this. I thought of that first year without Peter, signing Centrelink forms with shaking hands, pretending I was fine at barbecues, waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for a man who wasn't there. You do fall apart, I said gently, just not all at once, little bits at a time. Then you put yourself back together differently, stronger in places you never knew you had. She stared at me, eyes glistening. I want to be that version of myself, she whispered. Someone who doesn't run away, someone you can actually rely on. You're heading in that direction, I said. One shift, one choice at a time. She nodded slowly, as if trying to believe it. She went to bed soon after, the house settling into its usual nighttime creaks. I sat for a while longer in the quiet, Peter's folder open in front of me, bank statements and trust deeds neatly stacked. My daughter thought she was at the bottom, with nowhere to go but down. She had no idea the ground beneath her was already being shored up by a man who'd planned for storms he never lived to see, and by a woman he trusted to carry it through. The worst of the weather hadn't hit yet, but for the first time I could feel it. When it did, I wouldn't be the one blown away. The real storm hit quietly, not with hail on the tin roof or trees bending over the back fence, but with a thin white envelope and a knock at the front door on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through making myself a cuppa when it happened. Sophie was still dead asleep after her night shift, the house soft and still in that way. It gets late in the morning, bin truck already gone, school run finished, magpies arguing somewhere up the street. The knock came again, firm, measured. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and opened the door. A woman stood on the front step, late 30s, neat bun, navy blazer, already too warm for the Brisbane humidity. She carried a folder and wore that careful expression people use when they're about to deliver bad news they've practiced in a training room. Mrs. Lawson. Yes, that's me. She gave a small nod. I'm Claire Jenkins from Southern Pacific Bank. I'm here in relation to your daughter, Sophie Lawson. Is she available? My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed steady. She's asleep, works nights. Is this about the fraud investigation? Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise that I knew, maybe, or relief that she didn't have to dance around it. That's part of it, she said. I do need to speak with her directly. Right. I held the door open. You can wait in here. She won't be long. I led her to the lounge room, the one still full of Peter's things. His favorite armchair, his framed Broncos jersey, the old coffee table with the stain from when Sophie tipped a milkshake over it at 12. Take a seat, I said. I'll wake her. Sophie came to the door of her bedroom, looking younger than she had in years, eyes puffy, hair knotted, one of Peter's old t-shirts hanging off her shoulders. Mum, what's wrong? There's someone here from the bank, I said gently. You need to come out. She froze. For a second I thought she might bolt back into the room and slam the door like she used to as a teenager. You don't have to do this alone, I added. I'll be right there. Her hands shook as she followed me down the hallway. Claire stood when she saw her. Miss Lawson, I'm Claire from Southern Pacific. Thanks for speaking with me. Sophie's voice was barely there. Do I need a lawyer? That's up to you, Claire said, sitting again. I'm not here in an enforcement capacity. I'm part of the internal fraud and hardship team. I just need to go through some details with you and make sure you understand what's happening from our side. I sat down on the armchair opposite them, close enough that Sophie could feel me there, without me taking over. Claire opened her folder. As you know, several loans and credit facilities were taken out in your name over the past 18 months. You have disputed these, claiming identity fraud? Sophie swallowed. Because I didn't sign anything. I didn't even know they existed until I was overseas. Claire nodded. We've received a large amount of supporting documentation from you and from your legal representative. Sophie's head snapped towards me. What? I kept my eyes on Claire, but my hands slid across the couch cushion until it brushed Sophie's. Please go on, I said. Claire cleared her throat. Based on handwriting analysis, IP address tracking, witness statements, and your travel records, our preliminary finding is that it is highly likely you were the victim of identity fraud, perpetrated by a third party known to you. Sophie blinked rapidly. Highly likely, she repeated, like she was testing the words. Final sign-off hasn't gone through yet, Claire said carefully. But I'm here to explain that, effective immediately, all repayments on these disputed facilities are suspended. You are not required to make any payments while the file is being finalized. Sophie's shoulders dropped, as if someone had cut invisible strings. So, I'm not going to court, she whispered. That's extremely unlikely, Claire said. In fact, assuming the recommendation is approved, the debts will be written back and your credit report corrected. There will still be a note indicating there was a fraud investigation, but you won't be held liable for the balances. Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. Are you serious? She choked. I've been lying awake every day thinking I'd spend the rest of my life paying for something I didn't do. Claire's voice softened. I can't speak to what you've been through, but I can say this. It appears you've been very badly taken advantage of. Someone who knew you well exploited your trust. I'm sorry that happened. Ethan's name sat between us, unspoken but heavy. Sophie looked at me then. Really looked, as if seeing me in focus for the first time. Mum, did you... I asked Daniel to send through everything he had, I said simply. Peter didn't raise me to sit back and watch my daughter drown. Claire closed the folder. There's one more thing, she said. You're entitled to lodge a formal victim of crime report, and we can flag your details to help prevent future unauthorized accounts. Daniel has the paperwork. I'd encourage you to complete it with him. Sophie nodded, wiping her face on her sleeve. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Claire replied. Just take care of yourself. The rest will work through the system. After she left, the house went oddly quiet. Sophie stood in the middle of the lounge, the folder still in her hands, breathing like she'd just run up a very long hill. Mum, she said, her voice raw. You did all that? With the solicitor, the reports, everything? I shrugged, even as emotion pressed up behind my ribs. I made a few calls, followed Peter's breadcrumbs. You're my child, Soph. I wasn't going to let Ethan finish what he started. She sank onto the couch and covered her face. I don't deserve you, she whispered, words muffled. I sat beside her and rested my hand between her shoulder blades. No, I said quietly, you didn't. Not when you sold my life out from under me. She flinched. But you're trying now. You're working. You're facing things instead of running. That matters. She looked up at me, eyes red, cheeks blotchy. I thought I'd ruined everything, she said. Your security, my future, all of it. You made a monumental mess, I replied honestly. But you're not the only one who can clean. I took a breath. There's more you don't know yet. About what your father set up. About what I've been doing while you've been on night shift. Fear flashed across her face, then something else. Curiosity. Humility. I'll tell you, I said. Soon, when I know you're strong enough to hear it without seeing dollar signs. She gave a wet, shaky laugh. I don't think I'll ever see money the same way again. Good, I said. That's a start. That night, when she left for work, she paused at the front door. Mum? Yes, love? Thank you for standing with me, she said, even after everything. I smiled, small but real. Peter always said you'd either learn the easy way or the hard way, I replied. Looks like life chose the hard way for you. She nodded, eyes shining. Then I'd better not waste it. When the door clicked shut behind her, I went to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. The brown folder sat where it always did, full of titles and statements and quiet power. Soon, I thought, running my hand over the cardboard. Soon she'll know exactly who she almost threw away. And exactly how much ground she's been walking on that never stopped belonging to me. By Friday morning, the air inside my little fibre house carried that strange stillness Brisbane gets just before a summer storm, warm, heavy, and expectant. I felt it in my shoulders as I buttered toast, and in the quiet way Sophie hovered near the kitchen bench, twisting the sleeve of her shirt. She didn't know it yet, but today she'd step into a truth Peter had meant for her to face, only once she'd grown steady enough to hold it. "Mum," she murmured, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "We've got that appointment with your solicitor today, yeah?" "That's right," I said. "We'll leave around 9. She glanced down at her clothes, loose trackies, one of Pete's old shirts she'd been sleeping in. "Should I dress up?" "No need to be fancy," I said. "Just something that makes you feel like you're standing on your own 2 feet. 10 minutes later she reappeared, hair brushed, jeans neat, a simple white blouse. Nothing glamorous, nothing loud, just honest. It suited her far more than anything Ethan ever convinced her to buy. We caught the train into the city, watching the suburbs slide past. Weatherboards with peeling paint, jacaranda petals scattered on footpaths, kids lugging heavy backpacks, office workers clutching takeaway coffees. Normal life. The sort she hadn't really looked at in years. She pressed her forehead lightly against the glass. "Mum, if today goes badly, I just want to say thank you for letting me come home, for not giving up on me." I placed my hand on hers. "Let's hear what Daniel has to say first." Daniel's office overlooked the river, with a clean modern view of the Story Bridge stretching across the water. Sophie paused in the foyer, shoulders tight. "Mum, this place looks expensive." "He owes your father a few favours," I said mildly. "You don't need to worry." We were shown into a meeting room lined with books and soft lighting. Sophie sat stiffly, clutching her canvas handbag as if she expected someone to rip it from her fingers. Daniel came in with his usual steady smile. "Morning, Margaret." "And you must be Sophie." She gave a small, nervous nod. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course," he said, taking a seat. "Let's start with the urgent matter." He opened his laptop, clicked into a document, and rotated the screen slightly so she could see. "Sophie, the fraud investigation has been finalized. You've been cleared." She blinked hard. "What? Already? But they said it could take months." Daniel shook his head lightly. "The evidence was very clear. The signatures weren't yours. The IP addresses traced back to a VPN network linked to Ethan's devices. He used a doctored license and faked email addresses in your name." Sophie's breath hitched. "So, the debt, it's not mine?" "Not a cent," Daniel said. "You won't be held liable for anything he forged." She let out a soft, broken sound, half relief, half grief, and leaned forward, covering her face with her hands. "Oh God. Mum, I'm finally free." I reached out and rubbed her back gently. "I know." But Daniel wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to understand, Sophie." He opened a second folder and placed it in front of her. "This is the Lawson Family Trust. Your father set it up many years ago." Her brows knitted together. "Dad? What trust?" I watched her face closely as she opened the folder. Property titles, lease documents, dividend statements, term deposits, the West End Cafe building, the Wynnum units, the Rocklear yard, even the waterfront cottage Peter bought quietly and never mentioned, all of it under my name as trustee. Sophie's lips parted. "Mum, I don't understand. I thought you and Dad were always just getting by." "We were," I said softly. But your father also saved, invested, made choices we didn't talk about much. He did it bit by bit, year after year. Her eyes shone, filling quickly. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because you weren't ready, I said gently. Your father made me promise to wait. He wanted you to see the value in work, not just the shine of money. She swallowed hard, staring down at the documents like they belonged to another universe. Dad did all this for us? For us, I echoed. But he wanted you to learn who you are before you learned what he left, Daniel added quietly. And all the assets Sophie tried to sell, those sales have been legally reversed. Margaret has full control again. Sophie pressed her fingers to her mouth as tears spilled. I treated you so badly, she whispered. I hurt you. I was blind. And all this time, you were protecting me. No, I corrected, leaning forward. I was giving you space to come back to yourself. She closed her eyes, letting the truth settle deep. Mum, do you forgive me? I forgave you long ago, I said. The question is whether you forgive yourself. Her breath trembled as she nodded. I'm trying. I really am. As we left the building, the river breeze lifted her hair, and she paused to look out across the water. Ferries cutting slow paths, sunlight bouncing off the surface like broken glass. Mum, she said quietly, I'm ready now. For the truth, for everything you've been carrying, I don't want you to protect me from it anymore. I want to earn my place in this family again. I slipped my arm through hers as we stepped toward the station. Good love, I said softly. Because waiting at home, tucked inside a sealed envelope at the back of Peter's folder, was the one thing she still didn't know. The part he'd written, not for me, but for her. And she was finally strong enough to read it. The morning that really felt like an ending, and a beginning didn't arrive with thunder or drama. It slipped in quietly. Soft winter light spilled across the kitchen tiles. The kind of Sydney morning where the sun feels like a warm hand on your shoulder. I was making tea, listening to the kettle rumble. When Sophie shuffled in, pajamas, messy bun, eyes clear in a way I hadn't seen for years. Mum, she said, rubbing her face, you said there was still one more thing Dad left for us. One more envelope? I nodded. It's time. Her throat bobbed. I'm scared. You're not the woman you were a few months ago, love, I said gently. You can handle this now. She didn't argue. We went into my bedroom. From the top drawer of my bedside table, I took out a small navy envelope I'd touched 100 times without opening. Peter's handwriting was across the front. For Margaret and Sophie. Only when the truth has settled. Sophie traced the letters with her thumb as if she could feel him through the ink. We sat on the edge of the bed. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small USB stick. She unfolded the letter and read aloud, voice barely more than a whisper. My dearest girls, if you're reading this, it means you've both been through something hard and come out the other side. I knew our Sophie might have to break before she learned how to stand on her own 2 feet. And I knew, Margaret, you'd know when she was ready to hear the truth about what we built. The USB holds a message I recorded for you both. Watch it together. All my love, Peter. Sophie swallowed. I don't deserve any of this. Maybe not before, I said quietly. But now, you're earning it. We went to the lounge room, plugged the USB into the telly, and waited. And then there he was. Peter filled the screen, sitting in his old workshop. Same oil-stained flannel, same smudge of grease near his temple. Same crooked grin that had carried me through 40 years and 1 funeral. G'day, my girls, he said, giving the camera a little nod. If you're watching this, I'm probably up there somewhere arguing with St. Peter about whose name looks better on a toolbox. Sophie let out a short, startled laugh. Her first real laugh in months. Peter went on. Sophie, love, I always knew life might throw some rough blokes and bad ideas your way. You've got a big heart, and big hearts sometimes trust the wrong people. I didn't build the trust so you'd never struggle. I built it so when you finally learned the real lessons about responsibility, about not signing your life away to anyone with a slick smile, you'd have solid ground to rebuild on. Tears slid down her face, but they weren't frantic anymore. They were clean. Honest. "And you, Margaret," he said, eyes softening. "I knew you'd do what you've always done, quietly keep this family standing, not by rescuing everyone, but by letting them see themselves clearly. You've always been the strong one." My throat burned. I could almost smell the mix of oil and instant coffee that used to follow him into the house. Then he leaned a little closer to the camera, voice steady. "There's one more thing. The cabin on the coast, the one we bought when Sophie was a kid, where she used to race down to the water with sand in her hair. That place isn't just for holidays. It's meant for more than just us." I paused the video. Sophie turned to me, eyes wide. "You told the solicitor it was in the trust, but not why." I nodded toward the remote. "Press play, love." She did. "That cabin," Peter said, "is your next chapter, not as a getaway, as a haven. There'll always be women out there who've been cleaned out, lied to, tossed aside. Women who've had their names used on loans they never agreed to. Women who just need a safe place to catch their breath. Make it that place. Margaret, you'll know how to keep the wheels turning. Sophie, after what you've lived through, you'll know how to look these women in the eye and say, 'I get it, and you're not done yet.'" Sophie didn't crumble this time. She sat very still, tears streaming, but her spine straight. Peter finished simply, "Take care of each other. And take care of the ones who arrive on your doorstep, with nowhere else to go. That's all I ask. I love you both more than you'll ever know." The screen went black. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet tick of the wall clock and the faint rush of traffic in the distance. Then Sophie drew in a slow breath. "Mum," she said, voice low but clear, "I know what I want." I waited. "I don't want to run away to the cabin," she said. "I want to move there and start properly, not to hide, to build something, for women like me, like the ones on my cleaning crew, the ones staying too long with men like Ethan because they can't see a way out." She looked straight at me. "I want to turn it into exactly what Dad said. A haven." For the first time, she sounded like a woman with a purpose, not a girl with a plan. I nodded, feeling my chest ache in that bittersweet way that comes when grief and pride sit side by side. "Then that's what we'll do," I said. Together. 2 months later, the old coastal cabin had a new sign out the front, the Lawson Haven, temporary accommodation and support for women rebuilding after financial abuse and manipulation. The locals were curious at first, then helpful. The bakery donated day-old bread and pastries. The IGA set aside boxes of fruit and veg that still had a good few days in them. A retired teacher dropped off books and puzzles. A tradie mate of Peter's turned up one Saturday with a ute full of paint and didn't charge us a cent. Sophie ran the day-to-day. A program coordinator in scuffed sneakers and a Lawson Haven t-shirt, sitting at the table with women who arrived with nothing but a rubbish bag of clothes, and a look in their eyes I recognized from my daughter, weeks earlier. I handled the paperwork, the budgets, the calls with Daniel, the quiet, logistical bits that keep a place like that standing. It wasn't charity, it was community. And it was exactly what Peter had pictured when he signed those first trust documents all those years ago. One night, after we'd settled a new resident into the spare room, a grandmother blindsided by a son-in-law who'd drained her savings, Sophie and I stood on the cabin's veranda, mugs of tea in hand, watching the moon lay a silver path across the dark water. "Mum," she said, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for letting me fall, and still letting me come home." I squeezed her hand. "Thank your father too," I said. "He saw this version of you long before you did." She smiled through the tears. "Do you think he'd be proud?" I looked out at the sea, the cabin glowing softly behind us, another woman finally asleep in a safe bed under our roof. "He'd be proud," I said quietly, "but he wouldn't be surprised." Because in the end, justice didn't arrive in a courtroom, or in shouting matches, or in some big, dramatic showdown. It arrived like the tide, slow, steady, reshaping the shoreline over time. Sophie found her backbone. I found my peace. And together we turned betrayal into something no one could ever steal. A life built on truth. A bond rebuilt on respect. A haven for women who'd been told they were finished, when really, they were just at the messy start of their second chance. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. Your support keeps these Australian life stories alive. See you in the next one.